All right. Um, so I think I've shared a little bit about both my mom and my dad's kind of childhood and kind of up to the point that they met each other. I did realize something, and that was I need to kind of retcon my great grandma a little bit because I think I make her out to be such a terrible person, and honestly, I don't want that to be the case because I don't know what her story was. Like, I don't really know much about like her upbringing or her history, but just knowing the type of person that she became, I have a sense that there was probably also a lot of pain and tragedy in like her story as well. And so I just wanted to add that caveat. Like, I don't want her to necessarily be like the villain of this story, that she was such a terrible person. And I needed to kind of like add a little softness there, in the sense that, like, yeah, she probably was a very like hurt and broken person too. Just understanding a little bit about my parents' history, like, yeah. So let's not make her the villain of the story. I think she was just another person that also like got dealt a pretty terrible hand, and she just tried to make the best of what she had, in the best way that she could. So speaking of making the best of what they had, going on to my parents together before me and my brothers came into the world. So I think I shared a little bit last video that my mom is 5 years older than my dad. And that my dad was still in the military when they met, and I think he was within his probably his last year of service of his 5 years. So I'm assuming he's probably like 25, and my mom is probably early 30s at the point that they're meeting each other. As far as I know, my mom had a professional job. I got the sense that she was working in that bank, where she was doing very well. I'm not sure if she was in a manager position or what her responsibilities were, but she was respected in her profession. I think also, just knowing my story, I also got the sense that since my mom was a little older, she wasn't married at this point, she didn't have kids. I know when I hit 30, like, a lot of those things start to become very important, especially as you're looking around and you see a lot of your friends already married, kind of starting their lives. And I kind of suspect that that was true for my mom as well, that she was kind of feeling like, when is it going to be my turn? When do I get that happy ending? Especially knowing like the childhood that she had, and probably didn't have like happy examples of relationships up to that point either. I also know that a lot of my mom's uncles, because when I was a kid, we would hear this joke, and I don't know if my brothers remember this, but a lot of the uncles would be like 1, 2, 3, counting me and my siblings, and be like, "Oh, I thought you didn't want kids," to my mom. So clearly, something at some point has shifted in her, where she like maybe saw in her environment that she wanted that family. So, how did they meet? I know they met at a party. I'm assuming that for my dad, like, my mom was older, she had her life together, she had a plan, she was doing very well. My mom had great style and taste from the pictures that I have seen of her when she was younger. She was very fashionable. So she was a very attractive person. And I don't know exactly what, but I'm assuming that, it probably reminded my dad of his mom, who also was an independent career woman, right? She was living on her own, taking care of her 4 kids. So I think there was probably some appeal there. On my mom's side, right, like I said, she's in her 30s, right? At that point, looking at the dating pool, I'm in that situation right now. It's not so hot, right? There's not a lot of options, is maybe the mindset that she was approaching it from. And she saw many of her nieces and nephews like now getting married, having kids, having homes, right? And was probably feeling some sort of like pressure being left behind. And I do know for a fact that my dad heavily pursued my mom, at least at the beginning. I'm not sure when that pursuit turned to obsession, but there's clearly something in there that made her want to stay. And I say obsession, and I don't mean that like lightly, because I do know at one point my mom did have a restraining order on my dad. He did beat her. She ended up in the hospital. He threatened to kill her if she left him, drew a gun on her. Like, it was not a healthy relationship by any means from the beginning. And I'm assuming that is also part of the reason why she lost her job, is because he was stalking her. He would show up at her work and harass her at her place of work, and that was one of his ways of finding her. Not sure how he was able to convince her that he was going to become a changed man and turn everything around, and that he really loved her, and that was the reason for this behavior. I do know, I mentioned this a while back, that my mom was with a sister in California, and they lived in LA. I don't know if I mentioned that part, that they were in LA. And that sister had passed away suddenly. And I'm guessing, based on the time frame, that this was sometime around the same time frame, or right before this happened, that sibling passed away. And so I think there's also just like probably the sense for my mom of like, all right, at the very least, this person really says that he cares about me, he wants to be with me. And like, she wanted a family. I know for a fact my mom wanted to have a family and a home and all of that stuff. And so my dad promising that he's going to be a changed man probably sounded very appealing, right? Especially if she didn't have a lot of suitors at that point. And I also got the sense that she really liked my dad, right? So there's probably pool on both sides. So yeah, he convinced her somehow that that wasn't ever going to happen again, and that they should be together. And my dad ended up, after he left his military service, he ended up in LA where my mom was. And he ended up working at the post office, and he worked at the post office for my entire life as a maintenance technician for their electronic machines. It's also important to know that my dad was not a fan of my mom's family. He did not like a lot of her siblings. He felt that they were using her for money. Like I said, my mom was pretty financially well off. She obviously had a job on her own, apartment on her own in LA, so she was doing relatively well. And so I think there were loans that she was giving to family members for money or whatever that were having some issues, and my dad did not like that. And once he came in the picture, he felt like it was disrespectful to him, and that no one should be asking his partner for money without his consent. I think that's very telling of how my dad saw money and finances just in general in life, and just how he felt about other people. Don't know where he got these views of men and manhood from, because he didn't grow up with really any men in the household, so I'm not sure where these behaviors and patterns were learned, and it might have just been from a place of insecurity, because I don't know that he had a lot of healthy examples of manhood in his life. And if they were from the military, then they probably definitely were not healthy examples of manhood. So at some point during this time in LA, my mom gets pregnant, and they have their first child together. And he's my parents' namesake. And he only lived for a few months before he died of SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. I know my mom was completely devastated at this. And my revisionist history is that this was probably a divine intervention from the universe to help her leave him at this point. And the complete opposite happens. What ends up happening is that my dad very much blames my mom for the death of their child, and you know, but still wants to have a family and all of that stuff, and convinces her that moving out of LA would be a good idea. So then they leave LA, they move to a small town where I grew up, and they get married and they have my brother. This is all within maybe a year from my eldest brother passing away, that they have my older brother who's still alive, and move to this new place and get married. So in her grief, my mom and my dad become even more enmeshed in this relationship, and they become even more isolated. The wedding, as far as I understand, is just an elopement. They run off to Vegas and get married in a chapel. There's not really a story that I recall about a proposal or, you know, a wedding dress, or it being this big kind of romantic thing. It just kind of seemed like it was a practical thing of like, all right, we need to do this the right way of getting married, having children, and checking boxes. So obviously I'm preparing for the next chapter where me and my siblings come into this. As you can already tell, this is probably not the most stable environment for children to come into. My parents now live in the suburbs. They, I'm assuming, chose this place because one of my uncles had also gotten a house out there. So they knew it was affordable and all of that, a good place to live. And other than that, there's no other family there. My older brother is born within the same year of this house being purchased, and then I'm born maybe a little over a year after that. And then my little brother is born a little bit over a year after me. So now my mom is in the suburbs with 3 young children and just fresh out of grieving from a child that has passed away, and with a husband who has claimed that he has turned his life around and that things are going to be good. And I really truly think that his intentions were honest and true as much as they could be, but there is a lot of underlying things that have not been dealt with, and I think that carries into my childhood and how my siblings and I were raised in this environment. So that will be next chapter, which I know for sure will be long because this is the part that my brothers probably remember the most of. And so yeah, I hope this kind of helps at least color a little bit of the experience that we had and why our upbringing was just so abnormal, right? We came from these 2 branches coming together, and I think it's not surprising that chaos and craziness ensued. All right, so I'll see you in the next chapter. If I can figure out how to stop the video.